I'm going to start. Just so you guys don't have to wait. You can work on stuff. So, good morning and welcome. Hello to all of you here in person. It's a small but mighty group, so yay, we're really glad you're here. And welcome to everybody this morning who's joined us on Zoom. As I said, this is our first attempt at a hybrid meeting, so please excuse us if it's a little bumpy here and there. Fortunately, I have Lyle Wright from the Right Solution, my longtime trusty IT guy here to manage all of this. So thank you, Lyle. I'd also like to thank today's program sponsor, Genevieve Getman-Soa of GGS Consulting, for her sponsorship of our program today. GGS Consulting provides nonprofit organizations with development expertise and a toolkit of products and services to build effective and dynamic strategic systems, resulting in engaged communication practices, increased funding, and highly functioning operations. And we all want that. Genevieve was at the very first meeting of TVNPA. She is a founding member, and served 2 terms on the board, and we had to let her go because we have term limits. But we aren't letting her go that far. She still serves on our communications committee, and she is our sponsor for today. And I'm going to introduce you to her very quick. Hey, Genevieve.
Thank you, Kathy, for that really warm welcome. I am delighted to be back in the Bankhead Ferry Lobby with my friends and colleagues. This is such a wonderful organization. We brought hundreds of people together, hundreds of organizations to work more carefully towards serving our community. I work with organizations. I do board retreats. I do communications, planning, strategic planning, visual management. I'm known for my digital whiteboards. I love color. I love dynamic learning and communications experiences with organizations. And I particularly love working with boards and helping them through either a rough spot or taking the organization from one level to the next level. So if you have any interest in having a facilitator and strategic planning stuff in your organization, you can see me after or send me an email. And I think the email clicks through to my website on the e-blast. Thank you for everybody. Nice to see you. And I'm also a NICE consultant with Lisa Salomon, who's our speaker today. And NICE stands for Nonprofit Impact Consultants Ensemble. And we formed this ensemble about 1.5 years ago to bring services of all different kinds to organizations in need of help with financial, strategic planning, communications, development, that kind of thing. So be sure to look at niceconsultants.us. That's my other very favorite organization along with TVNPA. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Talk to you next.
We're still your favorites, though.
Yes. I have a couple of announcements for TVNPA before I turn the program over to our speaker. First, I'd like to let you know about our next 2 meetings. On May 12th, we will be hosting our monthly meeting in our new offices over at Common Point Nonprofit Center. This will be a working workshop aimed at helping nonprofit organizations who on their GuideStar profile aren't quite up to this gold or platinum level. And so it'll be working. You show up, you bring your computer, you bring your organizational information, you sit down, and Will and a few others will help guide you to get your profile. When you reach that level, you can put the label on your website that you're a GuideStar Platinum participant or whatever you call that, and also so that you can have when donors go look at your website, they can find all of your information there, and it's a great fundraising tool. Because if someone's looking at your website, it's another way to communicate with them when you're not there. So we want to help you. Another thing that's going on is Candid. They are the owners of the Foundation Directory, which is a great grant search program. And they are offering to nonprofits with budgets of $500,000 or less a free year of services of their lower directory access. But if you are a gold or silver status. So we want to help you guys get there. And then we want to enable you to have that free access to that information. So join us then. In June, we'll have a grant makers panel that'll be on June 9th, and that is one of our most popular programs of the year. And for those of you who don't know, TVNPA is now opening Common Point Nonprofit Center here in Livermore. This is an affordable co-working space for nonprofits to be able to work alongside, support, and learn from each other, and hopefully build collaborations as well. We have a great conference room and kitchen, and we also have virtual office options for nonprofits who don't need a place to work, but need a physical address and a place to receive their mail. So I'm also in the process of raising funds to keep the cost as low as possible for these nonprofits who want to take housing in our center. And so Chef has offered us to be a part of their spring give and their matching program. So for every $2 donated, TVNPA will get $1. And all of these funds will be going toward our building fund. So you can check out our website and you'll find the spring give button at the top of the page, and you can make a contribution. It will take you over to the chef page and you can contribute to our building fund. And we would really very much appreciate that. It would help support all the nonprofits in our community, because our goal is to have it be a living, breathing, operating space with nonprofits and services provided. And then finally, the nonprofit, the Tri-Valley Nonprofit Fund, the second quarter grant application just opened. And it's for nonprofits providing services to the Tri-Valley. Grants are up to $5,000. We have quarterly grants. We're putting out $25,000 every quarter. And you can apply as a nonprofit 4 times in a year, but you can only receive grants twice in a year. And the deadline is May 31. You can find all of this information on our website. Okay, so now it's April 2022. We rescheduled our in-person meeting in March 2020, thinking it was a short hiatus. 2+ years later, and here we are. Who knew? In March 2020, I didn't even know what Zoom was. And here we are doing our first hybrid meeting. And I just want to say I'm grateful we didn't know what was ahead of us as well. I just want to say that there's been so much uncertainty in the last couple of years. Are we opening up? Yes? No? Maybe? We hope and pray we're opening up for good now. Are we? That's the tricky question. And for us in the nonprofit world, where we're relying on relationships to keep our organizations running, it's been a daunting challenge. I do want to say how impressed I am with all of you and how adaptable you have been adjusting to whatever the current challenges of the day are to continue to execute on your missions, as well as continuing to raise money throughout this pandemic. This is what we're going to talk about today, and you're in for a treat. Lisa Saloman spoke at a TVNPA meeting a few years ago, and I have recently been working with her as a fundraising consultant with Quest Science Center. I've been so impressed with how Lisa has been able to lead the Quest fundraising team. I invited her to come and share her wisdom with you today. Lisa Saloman has actively worked in the nonprofit sector for over 35 years, even though she's only 36 years old. So she's really young. And has held senior development positions with both New York and Bay Area organizations. In 2002, Lisa launched Salomon Strategic Development, a consulting practice serving small and mid-sized nonprofits, seeking to build institutional infrastructure, capacity, and sustainability. Lisa's taught classes and workshops in fundraising and board development for over 2 decades, and over the course of her career has taken a leadership role in organizing and moderating conferences, panels, and roundtables for various organizations and associations, as well as providing other services to the field. Additionally, along with our program sponsor, Genevieve Getman's, Lisa is a member of NICE Consultants, a collective of like-minded consultants serving nonprofits looking to increase their capacity and their impact. And I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Lisa so we can get going. Please help me welcome.
Should we move this closer?
Yeah, why don't we just move the mic a little closer too?
Building myself a cave. Okay, is that better for folks online?
We're good.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. So this is my first hybrid event, meeting, speaking engagement as well. How many of you had as much trouble deciding what pants to wear this morning? Shoes, like shoes. I actually debated whether or not to show up in pajama bottoms and a nice top, just to sort of continue that comfort level of being in my little cocoon at home. But I'm really pleased that we're able to do this. And part of the conversation, or the large part of the conversation we're having here today is about reengaging our donors in a hybrid environment. And we'll talk about that in a number of different ways. I think, as you know, as Kathy said, relationship building is the most important part of successful fundraising, always, and always has been. 2 years ago, I actually remember I was at a donor event for a client, an arts client I was working with. And the next day we were all trying to figure out how to do Zoom and how to Zoom from home. And I remember having conversations with them at the time about what the priorities were. And I think initially, as in the Wayback Machine, as we all might recall, we were talking about it's only going to be a few weeks, and then we'll come back. So we don't want to change too much. And then there was the conversation about when are we going to get back to normal? I think what's evolved for me, at least, and I think a way in which I like to encourage my clients to think about how we move forward is, rather than thinking that we're going back to something, that we're actually on a path of lifelong learning, and that we are going to take what we've learned in the last couple of years, some of which actually has been really beneficial and good for us. And how do we take that forward? How do we integrate that into our practices? How do we redefine best practices? I think the confluence of the pandemic and the racial justice movement has really afforded us an opportunity to take a step back and revisit our practices as they relate to equity and inclusion, and how we are engaging our communities, and what do specifically in development, what donor platforms look like, what do donor programs look like, how do we define donors? I'd be interested to hear, how many of you, regardless of whether you work in the nonprofit field or not, define yourselves as donors. How many of you are donors? And online, how many of you are donors? See some thumbs up, hands up, great. So the bottom line is, most of us who work in the field also are doing it because we care, because we have a passion for it. And we are also donors, whether we're a $50 donor or a $500 or a $5,000 or $50,000 donor. All of those relationships are valuable. And every nonprofit that tries to engage donors should be thinking about that as they're moving forward. So I think there's the part about engaging people doesn't change. The relationships that we build in our lives are important. It's people give to people. That's what this field is about. And even in, when you look at corporate, for example, companies don't give. It's individual decision makers and employees who band together to make choices about where they want to support it. And most folks, especially when you think about individuals, give from here first. And so finding ways to connect with them and engage with them is important. When we think about the ways in which we've connected with folks over the last 2 years, obviously there was a dramatic shift, right? I've worked with a lot of arts organizations, so I'm sure Chris can speak to this, that the arts and the restaurant industry, right, were the two that immediately were hit like that. And obviously many other industries, and we have our organizations that support first responders and health and human services, that there were huge impacts all around. But the ability to make a living for all these people, and the ability to connect in ways that had been sort of the historic ways that folks were connecting, immediately disappeared for most arts organizations. So they had to start reinventing, as did many others. I worked with on a panel early in the pandemic, a woman who runs an organization that provides family services, that housing services to children and their parents, to families, and they have always done it in person. They learned very quickly that in some ways the ability to go online and to do that work, both virtually over Zoom and also on the phone, setting up phone banks and things like that, was in many cases equally, so they were able to reach more people and worked really well. Arts organizations started finding new ways to engage with donors. Lots of folks started thinking, and one of the things I remember having a conversation with a client I was working with at the time of the shutdown, that it's, that there, folks started going to panic mode, saying, how are we gonna pay the bills? What are we gonna do? How it's about us. It's not about you. It's not just about you. It's about your audience members and your donors. And when we look at our donor communities, many of them are of a generation where they are, they're in the most vulnerable populations. And we need to start thinking and being considerate of them and making sure that they understand that we are here for them in the same ways as we expect them to be for us. So those are the kinds of, just psychologically, the kinds of things you need to start thinking about. As we start coming back, it's also really important to remember that not everybody has the same comfort level. I wear, here's my security blanket. I walk around with it. I was debating whether or not I was going to wear it, while we were mingling and all of that here. And we have to be respectful of people's choices, right? Regardless, whatever they are, as we start opening up. And we have to think about ways in which we can continue to have and build and sustain those relationships, regardless of whether it's the person we're trying to build that relationship with makes exactly the same choices that we do. So that's something that's really important to think about too. I remember early on, one of the practices that I started engaging in for myself, because I have a dog and I had to get my dog out every day. And I'm fortunate that I live, and we're all fortunate here, that we're in an area where we live really close to some fabulous open spaces and hiking trails. I actually started doing walking meetings with clients and colleagues. And it was one of the nicest, most fun and healthiest things that I did for myself during the pandemic, and something that I plan to continue. I would, we would say, let's meet at this time. We're going to go for a dog walk, and then we'll sit outside on my patio and have a glass of wine. It's a really nice way to engage. And those are the kinds of things that a lot of organizations started doing and started recognizing. I have a friend and colleague who works for Post Peninsula Open Space Trust. They were already in the practice of taking their donors on hikes, right? So, but those are the kinds of things that we can think about what other folks are doing and transpose them for our own organizations and find ways to have people feel comfortable engaging with us again. I have another colleague who works for a theater company. And she said that she was struggling with how to engage with some donors. And there was one donor in particular who was so excited at the opportunity to get together in person again, but wasn't comfortable doing it inside. So they found outdoor restaurants. They went for hikes together, all kinds of things. So there are lots of ways to do that. And there are lots of opportunities that we can share with each other. There are opportunities for collaboration. There are, I've known of situations where a colleague of mine at the Oakland Symphony partnered with a restaurant and cafe that had an outside space, and they did outdoor concerts last summer and plan to continue that because it was successful for both the restaurant and the musicians and the symphony. There are ways in which you might all collaborate with each other. In thinking about how might our missions align, where are the opportunities to collaborate with complementary organizations where we could do something like a group hike or or take advantage of an outdoor space like this lovely plaza here. Those are all things that we want to think about. It's also really important to think about when we're doing even something like this, developing accessible, equitable opportunities for folks to participate. Again, getting back to that comfort level of not everybody's going to be comfortable, having 100 or 150 or 200 or 500 people in an indoor space together right away. So there are going to be some people that want something that is more of a hybrid. But when you're going to do that, it's, I guess I'll just throw it out to you for a response. Which model feels better to you as a donor? A model where you are, there's a bunch of people who are, as you are here, sitting in person in a theater or in a lobby or in an organization participating in a live experience And then there's your camera, and the folks online are able to just watch it and have no opportunity to interact, versus a truly hybrid model where you've got folks who are interacting in the room and opportunities for folks to interact online. Which feels more equitable to you?
Second one.
Obviously, yeah, the second one. And so even in thinking about how we were going to manage this event today, we started out having conversations about, well, what makes the most sense? Should we, and I'm a big fan of interactive engagement. I think, I could talk, I'm a talker, I could stand up here and talk for an hour and a half. And I think, I don't think that would benefit all of you in the same way that having opportunities to talk to each other will benefit all of you. So in just a couple of minutes, we're going to go into a breakout session. And those of you here in the room are actually going to break out in groups of 4 to 5. And I think we probably have about 3 to 4 groups worth of people here. And those of you on online are also going to be sent into breakout rooms. And Carol is going to paste the breakout instructions into the chat for you, a link to the breakout instructions. So you'll have an opportunity to break out as well. And then we will all come back together as a large group and have an opportunity to share the highlights of what we talked about in those conversations. And before we do that, I want to just sort of share one more thing, and that, in terms of how we're addressing what we're talking about in breakouts and how we're addressing this idea of reengaging donors, recognizing that there are both challenges and opportunities, right, in coming back together, that as some of which we've just talked about. But when it comes to events in particular, it is, it's even more challenging. And I want to just ask Chris to briefly share a best practice that they've adopted and plan to continue beyond the pandemic, because that's the sort of the framing for the conversation we're going to have is around is sharing best practices, sharing something, a way in which you overcame a challenge during the pandemic around donor engagement that you plan to sustain. And then I also want you to have a conversation and come up with maybe 2 to 3 new best practices that you would like your organizations to adopt around building equity and access. I think the advantage of streaming, this is a small event, but the advantage of streaming a performance, or I actually know somebody who's about to stream their gala. They're doing an outdoor, they're going back to a traditional gala format, but they're doing it outside. They're having an outdoors under the stars gala, and they are streaming it for folks who don't even feel comfortable with that. So they're providing levels of access that didn't exist before the pandemic. So that, I think that is something that is for all of us to consider, all of those kinds of things. So Chris, do you want to just quickly share what you all have done as an example of the kinds of things we might talk about?
Yeah, a couple things I could tell you about. I hope everyone can hear me okay online. One of the things, obviously, we rely on in-person programming to be for everything that we do. And so when we were closed, we just did the numbers yesterday. We probably lost somewhere between $2 and $2.5 million in revenue that we would have projected to gain if we were been open during the closure. But we were able to still fundraise, which was really helpful. Even though we couldn't do in-person programming, we could still fundraise. And we did have a few events. One in particular that we did in places of our annual gala is we did an online streaming gala event. We called it the Best of the Bankhead, and it was kind of unique and fun because we did it from the stage, but we also had contacted several performers that had performed here in the past that were really successful and popular. And I said, would you please do a 5-minute video for our audience? And they all said yes. And so we had like Paula Poundstone and Jake Shimabukuro and Keiko Matsui. They all did something. They sent a message to our donors. It was all very personal. It was about being here at the Bankhead Theater. And they all did it for free, which was nice. I usually have to pay them a lot of money to do some of this stuff. They did it for free because it was very easy for them to do. And we had Brittany over here, she was on the stage and we were chatting with our donors online during the whole streaming event, and people were giving. They were chatting back, and it was really fun, and we raised over $200,000 for that event. Another thing that we did, even though we couldn't open inside, was we started using spaces that we normally wouldn't use. We have this courtyard out here that's really nice. We rarely ever use it. We started doing monthly concerts outside featuring local artists. And it was for a smaller crowd, but what the nice thing is I've always wanted to support local artists, and I can't do it on this stage because it's too expensive, but I could definitely do it out there, and we're continuing that program now. And that's something we adopted and we're going to continue doing indefinitely. And we found sponsors for it. People are really excited to support it. And it's a great way for us to do what we want to do for the community and support local artists and still have live performances, whether or not we can do it inside on the stage. We'll definitely continue doing that as well. Those are just two examples.
That's great. No, that's really great. Thanks. And I think that's an important thing to remember too, that's another, not only does streaming provide more people with access to your program. I'm actually working with a client, it's a small classical music organization that does a competition. And they typically would get 500 people attending their competition in San Francisco on an annual basis. They had 5,000 folks watch the competition last year because they streamed. And so that also, guess what? That's 5,000 more donor participants, right? And some of whom may not give, some of whom may give very little, and you know, 2 or 3 might give a lot. So there, you know, lots of different ways to start to be thinking about this, and also thinking about how are you building and rebuilding your community, right? So it's not just about the donors, it's the larger community. How are you engaging with your larger community, all of whom have the opportunity to support your organization in some ways? How are you defining what it means to support your organizations? Because it's not just about cash. I think that's something I started thinking a lot more about as we have these conversations about equity, that there's a lot beyond the financial and capital resources that are a great value to organizations like yours. So with that said, I'm going to ask Genevieve to hand out, if you can all start the simplest thing would be to just sort of break out in groups of, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like maybe, 3 to 4, like 4, maybe 4 groups, 4 groups of 4. Sit, you can use those benches over there. You can stay in the seats here. Those of you online are going to be put into a breakout room in just a minute. Not yet, Carol, please, just 1 second. I just want to quickly walk through. The first thing you're going to do really quickly is identify a timekeeper to help keep an eye on the clock and make sure you get through the prompts in the time allotted. We're going to give you 15 minutes to have that conversation, and then another couple minutes wind down to just synthesize before we come back into the room. So you want a timekeeper, and then somebody who's going to report out, identify somebody who's going to be a note taker and report out for your group. And we're not going to do formal reporting out with every single group, but we're going to ask you to share high-level takeaways when we come back together. So first, we want you to each introduce yourselves. And then, as I said earlier, share one innovative or creative way that you were able to turn a pandemic challenge into a new way of engaging donors, similar to the examples that Chris just gave, and particularly ones you plan to sustain. And then have that group discussion about best practices that build greater equity and access. So unless there are any questions, I would go ahead and go into your breakout rooms, and I'll see you in about 18 minutes.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Did we have good discussions? All right, I'm gonna just to give folks who are online a chance to settle back in. I'm going to start with one of the groups from in the room, and then we'll have an opportunity to hear from everybody. Folks online, please let us know. We've moved the speaker so that everybody here can hear you when you're speaking as well. So please put a message in the chat if you're having trouble hearing or seeing at any point. I'd love to start with just, high level takeaways. Was there, and I'd like to hear not what you talked about, but what you heard from somebody else. Would any of the groups like to share, or would anybody just like to share what was something, what was a great idea that you heard from somebody else? What's something that you want to adopt? Yeah.
Well, Mr. Jay Davis here had a great idea. His idea was to go to corporations, instead of going to them and asking for money, to go to them and ask them for a tour of their facility or to understand how their business worked. And so then you get in there and you learn about the company. And so he did that with Gillig, and it was a huge success.
Great. Anything else? What did we hear from other people? And if anybody online would like to unmute and share, please feel free to do that as well. We're gonna,
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, so yes, I heard from my group that, during COVID, a lot of people knew that our clients needed help, that there were, underserved communities, and there was a lot of grant money out there. But now that's not so much coming in. So really just, making sure that we're still telling our story. We're still getting that message out there, that there are still a lot of people in need and our programs need to be sustained.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that messaging has stopped.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Anything else? For folks online, if you use the reactions button and to raise your hand, if you want to say something, that'll bring you to the front of the queue, so I can easily see that somebody is wanting to say something. So go ahead and do that if anybody online wants to say anything. Oh, come on, don't be shy.
Steve McCoy, he'll talk.
Who's back there?
Who's hiding? Who's hiding? All right.
Yeah, Steve.
Here, okay. Layla.
Unmute.
Layla, you got to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay. So in our group, we had someone from a nonprofit say that they had a better opportunity to reach out and have inclusion and diversity with their nonprofit. They were able to reach out with a Vietnamese group, and that was really a wonderful experience. So I thought that was really nice that they did that.
How did they do that?
Michelle, you want to take over?
Sure. It was really by partnering with a Vietnamese speaking, partner, and it was literally the first time that we've had our message directly translated into Vietnamese, and it was so impactful. We're definitely looking at Spanish and potentially a third language as well. So, and we support the Bay Area, but also California wide in terms of the potential for diversity and inclusion.
Right. Thank you. That's wonderful. I mean, let's not forget that's really important, right? Just inviting people to attend something or to participate in something, but not setting up your programs or making it possible for them to participate equitably, as we were talking about earlier, that applies to language too, right? If language is a barrier, if transportation is a barrier, if folks can't get to where you're inviting them, if you're hosting these lovely events in Napa, outdoor events in Napa, and people don't have cars or don't have the adequate transportation to get themselves there, that's something to consider. And that's another advantage again of doing things online. There are tools that you can use for simultaneous translation. There are trained translators who can do that for you. There's ASL as a language, right? How are you doing that? Yeah, great, thank you. Kathy.
Looks like Steve is going to say something.
Oh, great, Steve.
Me? Yeah, so we had I guess I'm the spokesman for our group by default, because we have Greg who's a business person, and we have a new nonprofit. So I was able to share with them. So I can tell you a little bit about what PPIE has done. I'm the executive director of Pleasanton Partnerships in Education. We're a foundation. We support our schools. And in some ways, the pandemic created an opportunity for us to engage with businesses in a way that we couldn't in the past. So it was in some ways, it was really an opportunity. So 4 years ago, we started a speed interview program where we had business volunteers do mock interviews with students. And we built on that by approaching businesses to volunteer in the classroom or have an after-school club mentorship or what have you. And Zoom was great because the business person could then do it like in a 20-minute chunk and engage with those students, and they didn't have to spend an hour and a half. And so I think one of the lessons learned, our lessons learned, is that Zoom in some ways can be a first step, an interim step to building a personal in-person relationship so that you can use Zoom to invite business people or donors to, visit remotely your facility, or maybe have a Zoom conversation with some of your constituents or something like that. It's an easy ask. And then once you've had that engagement, then you have somebody you can follow up with them and say, oh, I hope you like the program. I'd love to have coffee with you. Or would you like to learn more, et cetera. So anyway, so Zoom for me creates a half step towards building a full step relationship with someone.
Great, thank you. Anybody else from the room? Anybody from this side of the room? Gina?
Yeah, so we had a very interesting group. I relate something that Megan, who's the
Gina, hang on one second. I don't know that they can hear you. The mic's over here. Can you either maybe come over here or speak? Yeah, great, thanks.
How's this?
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I wanted to relate something that Megan, who is the development manager at, where am I speaking to? Mike's here.
Get behind the mic.
Okay.
Yeah, if you go up to the mic. Yeah. Sorry, as we work this out, but if you go behind the mic.
It's over here, actually. Over, just right here is what.
There you go.
Yeah, great.
Are you a political figure?
There you go.
No, it was.
See, now we can see the
Yeah,
front.
almost like sideways toward the. Just a little bit, we're all good, that way.
Okay, this is not going to be as good as all the prep that you made me go through here now.
You'll look marvelous.
Okay, so Megan, who is a development director at Bucknell, so it was a very interesting conversation. Someone who's trying to raise money for scholarships at a university and other things, said that not having these in-person meetings with all their donors, which is a very big part of how they do their business, they relied on Zoom, but she said they also had to learn to rethink, hone their communication skills in other forms, written, like emails, and being very thoughtful about an impactful email, thinking really about the subject line, right? I mean, people get so many emails. What do you put in the subject line that is going to remind them that they talk to you on Zoom or they talk to you on the phone, and it keeps that relationship building when you can no longer do it in public. And the other thing I'll add is that Gina from Citizens Bank, First Citizens Bank, talked about how there's so many virtual tools, Zoom, Google Meets, Teams, all of them, and they all have different functionality. They all have lots of functionality that we probably haven't really explored thoroughly, but can really increase, like the language interpretation. Some of them actually have places you can change language, and there are lots of tools, functionality in these applications that we really need to, if we're going to keep doing this, because a lot of us are doing hybrid meetings, even though we're back in person, city council meetings as an example, knowing Zoom's full functionality or any of those tools is really important.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. And also, understanding the full functionality and also understanding, and I'm assuming that most of you know this already, but that a lot of these companies that have these amazing facilitation tools have nonprofit rates and educational rates. They will either, deeply discount. For a while they were doing it for free, but then they figured out that they didn't need to. But they, Zoom deeply discounts a lot. SurveyMonkey has nonprofit discounts. There's lots of these different platforms that do provide that as well. So I think that's that's something else to think about. And, you know, getting back to the conversation about there were two comments about business relationships and building relationships with businesses, thinking both about businesses who are, whose culture and mission or vision, if you will, are similarly aligned, right? If you're, if you've got alignment in terms of what they care about, what and who you care about, you serve. If you are serving a community of people and or companies who they care about, that's, there are logical opportunities for partnership. And when you think about all of the ways in which you want to have hybrid interaction, think about what are the tools you need. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that most nonprofits face during the pandemic and still, which is, if you're going to do a hybrid gala, it's got to be high quality, right? You can't just stream on your phone. That doesn't provide the same experience for the folks who are watching it online. So you have to build it into your budget. You have to create investment. But I think to the point that Chris made earlier, which is a really important one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years is that people will give. There were a lot of folks that were worried they were going to lose their donors. I know a number of organizations whose individual giving increased over that period of time, particularly organizations that had been heavily reliant on earned income and had to shift their ratio of funding to contributed income. A lot of people stepped up and continue to step up, and that and again, building and sustaining those relationships, being able to leverage celebrities, and it's not just artistic celebrities, it's business celebrities. It's the busy, as Steve was saying, the busy business people who might not have time to come in and spend 2 hours coming and doing something in person to mentor students, but would happily make the time during their lunch hour or at the end of the day to mentor, to tutor, to participate in any number of programs. So what else did you hear from folks in your conversations? I'd love to hear. Let's go back to the online folks. Anybody else want to share anything?
Lisa, are you there? Lisa Tromovich, you were there a second ago. I was going to call her out.
Kathy's calling you folks out.
I can't see others. Can you put
Sorry
her
about that. Yeah, I'm here.
I bet you have some good information to share.
So we learned two things. We used the opportunity to do something that we'd always wanted to do because we couldn't be doing what we were doing, the outdoor festival, which takes all year to put together and then all summer to execute. It allowed us to explore some new things. And so I'd always wanted to do new plays, and we wanted to get a tighter relationship with our community, which in Livermore includes 2 national labs. And we wanted to further our DEI efforts. So we specifically did a commissioning project called Science at Play, where we specifically asked for writers of color to produce science plays that would feature scientists of color so that students would, see people that look like them in scientific roles. And we would never have had the time to put all of that together, a whole new program, which we're going to run for 5 years. So we'll produce 5 plays if we hadn't been shut down, so we took our time and our resources, did something we'd always wanted to do, and we were able to create something new that's now going to go forward with us. So that was the second question that was asked of us. And then the first question, my answer to that one was, I called around and I asked 4 or 5 people that were just close to the company and said, what do you want from us now that we're all in lockdown? And they said, we want the social aspects of theater. We don't really expect you to put a show on our laptops. And so we did virtual trivia, and we had 100 people show up the first night, 80 the second night. And even just before we shut down, we were still at 60 people every time we did it. And so recognizing that maybe what people wanted from us wasn't so much a play or an actor, but the opportunity to commune, it caused us to do something we never would have done normally. And it was great, kept us together for a year.
That's great. And that's, I have know of other theaters, and I had a couple of clients actually who did radio plays, right? They commissioned radio plays, which was something that, a lot of people really, really loved and were excited about. Book clubs, where you're actually reading plays, you're inviting your audiences to read plays, or you're inviting your audience to read books on a subject that relates to your organization, and convening people. I think that, that's so important. I'm glad you raised that, Lisa, because that sense of community, building that sense of community for folks is that's what we were all missing, right? So I think it's really, sometimes we make things too complicated. If you just sit down and think about, what am I missing? What feels, like a void for me, and how can I help provide that for other folks? And I think also something I want to just point out that Lisa said, ask the question, what do you want? How can we support you? We're not just inviting you to support us, but how can we support you and support your engagement? And how can we partner? That word partnership, I think, is really important too. We have time for just, for a couple more. Yeah, Chris? Okay, great. Chris, you want to go, and then we'll go to the question in chat. Thanks.
Sure. Do you want me to come up there, or am I allowed?
Yeah, if you can, you're allowed, but then they can't see how well you're dressed, so.
All right.
He's now wearing pajamas.
I gotta suck it in, okay. So one thing we talked about was, podcasts kind of grew in popularity. They're still very popular. And we did a series of video interviews when we were closed. So I interviewed local people that were involved in the arts, including Lisa Tromovich. She was one of the interviews that we did. And Laura Weber and Eric Swalwell. And there was a very popular series that we did. And we're going to bring that back with next season. So we're going to invite some of our artists that are performing to do video interviews before the show, so that we can use that to help promote and engage with the audience. And I think people really like the personal connection that you can do that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And then the other thing we kind of started talking about was, when you're doing the hybrid event or the online event for the fundraising, it's can feel somewhat less personal. But I found for myself personally, when we were doing our show, our performance here, and there was nobody in the audience, it's just three of us in the whole building doing this, and we're looking at the screen and we can see all the donations coming through and all the messages that people are saying. And I was actually more moved at that moment than I've ever been during fundraising. I don't know if it had anything to do with the fact that we were closed and all of these other things going on, but to see people typing in, "We love you, we miss you so much," all this stuff, you don't get that even in person, right, where people are just raising their paddles. It's so different. And so there was a way to make it very personal too. So I don't want to lose that either. I loved the messaging that we were getting from people during a live streaming event. So.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that's so important. Making it personal, and also I was working with Playwrights Foundation during the pandemic on a strategic planning process, and they have for those of you who don't know, they have a festival. They produce a playwrights festival in San Francisco every summer, and they moved the whole thing online, and they also increased the number of folks who watched, and the chat, and watching similar experience. Watching the chat and people commenting on what they were seeing. It really, in a lot of ways, felt you felt like an audience member. You felt like you were part of that. And what you raise also reminds me of something else, a conversation I had with another theater client, and which could really apply to anybody's gala, right? As you start thinking, first of all, I think we need to be, and I know many of us have been for years, asking ourselves, is a gala, a traditional gala, still an appropriate, is that still appropriate to people? Are people coming? Is it, having these, very high price tickets, et cetera? Is it the right model for us? I think one way to make that more equitable and to expand the idea of that model is it's not just about what you charge for folks who actually come to the space, but setting things up. One of the things that I heard from some donors when I was doing interviews during the pandemic was, we'd be happy to host a group of 10 to 15 people in our backyard to, come together in our own, like, sort of small groups of community, right? To watch a live streamed event together. So that there are lots of different ways that you can do it. You can have something that's live in, in a theater with a particular group of people. And then you can also have watch parties, essentially, in other places that follow different themes and actually are hosted in environments that are comfortable for different types of people. So some folks might prefer to go to a brew pub, like be in a brew pub, or in the garden of a brew pub. Other people might, want something different. So there's so many different ways to think about this. Carol, do you want to read that question from the chat?
Sure. It's our continuing challenge is how to engage elders who are not technically savvy with Zoom or virtual events.
Yeah, that's a really important one.
You repeat the
Yes, I will repeat the question. How to engage older folks who are not technically savvy or comfortable with virtual events. And so I think that we've got I will say, to be fair, in any age group, right? We have those of us who are.
I'm not technically savvy.
You're more, exactly. Before that, like 2 years ago, I would have said I'm not technically savvy either. I've become a lot more technically savvy in the last 2 years, as I think most of us have. I think that telephone, and again, this gets back to what I said in the beginning. What you want to think about when you're talking to your donors and communicating with your donors, you want to think about their comfort and confidence. I think to the point that Lisa made earlier, ask them. Right. I think we know this about our donors. This is something that, good development practice for years, right? We know who our mail people are. We know who our online people are. We know who our phone people are, right? People will share their preferred communication methods with us, and we need to respect that even when we're in a virtual world. So have conversations, find ways to, and if it's, if they can't get on Zoom, is there somebody close to them if they're interested in watching? I mean, I had one woman say to me, until I can go back to live theater, I have no interest in watching things online. I'll just watch a movie. So there's some people who feel that way, and you may or may not be able to change their mind. So rather than focusing on trying to get them to adapt to what you're doing, think creatively about how you can meet them where they are. That's a big piece of equity and equitable participation, is meeting people where they are and not trying to twist them into a pretzel so that they can fit the model of what you think they should be, what your audience needs to look like.
So I just want to point out for that question too, what you just talked about, doing a watch party can actually help somebody who's not technically savvy.
There you go.
Because all they have to do is show up and you can do the technical part.
Yeah, exactly. And now I think that's, again, we've moved past the fully, quarantined where we can't be with other people at all. And I think as we're going into the warmer months too, it's the setting up. I mean, I remember when, there was an event, I don't know, like a year and a half ago, where I had folks, something that everybody wanted to watch on television. And I took my monitor out and put it on the stump in my backyard, and I hooked my laptop up to it, and invited people over to have a drink and to watch the event on television. And so there are different, we can make that work. We can be creative about it. Any final comments